The U.S. Army faced a mathematical challenge in the summer of 1944. Written in blood and fuel, it was a hard, cold equation. In the Normandy hedgerows, the life expectancy of an American tank crew was measured in weeks rather than months or years, because their own tanks lighted up the first time they were struck. Just like cigarette lighters, the crews dubbed them Ronson lighters. Before it even got off the ship, the American Sherman was rendered useless against the German Panthers and Tigers. It was a rolling bomb since it was under-armored, undergunned, and propelled by a gasoline engine. According to the doctrine, you had to anticipate losing 3 Shermans in order to kill 1 Tiger. Logistics signed a suicide pact. However, the statistical inaccuracy was an outlier. One tank commander decided to change the rules of armored warfare after looking at the calculations and spitting on the ground. He didn't conceal himself. He didn't hold out for air assistance. He didn't wait for the 5-to-1 odds, either. He made a charge. This one man and his company killed nearly 1,000 enemy soldiers and destroyed 12 German tanks, 258 armored vehicles, and self-propelled cannons during 81 days of suffering. The spearhead that broke through the German line was led by him. The Germans thought he was a ghost rather than merely a tank commander because of how quickly and forcefully he moved. This is the tale of the man who made the most lethal weapon in the European theater out of a tin can. This is War Daddy's narrative. Staff Sergeant Lafayette Pool was the man at the center of this storm. And you have to consider who he was before to the uniform in order to comprehend how he managed to survive while everyone else was dying. By profession, Pool was not a soldier. He was a combatant. He was a Golden Gloves boxing champion in the sweltering heat of Texas before to the war. Additionally, he engaged in combat in the ring in the same manner that he did in Europe. He was not a dancer. He was not a weaver. He was an advocate of extreme violence. He thought the other person wouldn't get back up if you hit him first, and so hard his forefathers could feel it. This hostility was an issue when he enlisted in the Army in 1941. The Army is a set of regulations, guidelines, and protocols. It is not meant for fighters, but rather for discipline. Pool was in trouble all the time. Drilling was something he detested. He detested saluting. He detested having to wait. Because of his innate leadership, he was often given a commission to become an officer, but each time he declined. "I just want to have one of the best tank crews in the division," he said to his commanders. "Sitting in a command tent is not what I wanted to do. I'd like to be in the turret." His fate was determined by that choice. He was assigned to the spearhead of the 3rd Armored Division. However, it also put him in the M4 Sherman tank. At this point, the narrative changes from biography to survival horror. You must comprehend the machine Lafayette Pool was battling in order to comprehend what he accomplished. The Sherman tank is frequently cited in history as the war's hero. America produced 50,000 of them because they were dependable and quick. The individuals inside, however, saw it as a steel coffin. German technology had advanced by a generation by 1944. The typical American 75mm cannon could hardly penetrate the frontal armor of a German Panther tank. If you were to shoot a Panther in the face from 500 yards away, the shell would just bounce off and leave a scratch. However, from 2,000 yards distant, a German gun, such as the fearsome 88mm on the Tiger or the high-velocity 75mm, could pierce a Sherman like a hot needle through butter. Before you could see the Germans, they could kill you. And the outcome was disastrous when a Sherman was struck. The ammunition was kept in the sponson adjacent to the crew. High-octane gasoline powered the engine. The crew compartment might become an incinerator in a matter of seconds with just one spark. Lafayette Pool had to deal with this fact. With one hand bound behind his back, the heavyweight boxer entered the ring to take on the behemoth. However, Pool had an absurd theory that contradicted all of the Army's field manuals. He chose to view the Sherman's shortcomings as assets. Despite its weakness, the Sherman was quick. Its motorized turret rotated more quickly than the German tanks. Poole came to the realization that he would perish in a long-range conflict. It was assured by the math. Thus, his approach was straightforward and terrifying. "Go closer. I'm not going to sneak around," he declared to his supervisors. "I will drive directly down the German army's throat." Get inside the opponent's grasp was the boxer's mentality. Smother him. Don't allow him time to aim or space to breathe. This tactic necessitated a degree of violence that was on the verge of suicidal madness. However, a tank commander's effectiveness depends on the troops in the metal box with him. A biological machine is a tank. 5 minds must collaborate as one. You perish if the driver hesitates. You perish if the loader mishandles a shell. You perish if the shooter blinks. Lafayette Pool was aware that he couldn't handle this on his own. He therefore hand-selected a group of misfits who, on paper, appeared to be a recipe for disaster rather than merely selecting soldiers. However, they became into the U.S. Army's most deadly unit in the heat of battle. Wilbert Richards, the driver, came first. They referred to him as Baby. He was a modest, quiet child from the Midwest. He didn't say much. He didn't appear to be operating a 30-ton war machine. Instead, he appeared to be bagging groceries. However, Poole recognized something in him. Richards had a hint. The engine was palpable to him. He was capable of dancing like a Sherman tank. When asked to charge a Tiger tank, Poole needed a driver who wouldn't back down. When every instinct told him to apply the brakes, he wanted a driver who would slam the accelerator. That man was Baby Richards. Then there was Del Boggs, the loader. He was referred to as Jailbird. He was a brawler and a roughneck, the complete antithesis of Richards. Prior to the conflict, he had a criminal record. He had been offered a uniform or a cell by the Army. The uniform was Boggs's choice. Poole channeled his resentment, which was the size of Texas, on his shoulder. The loader's work is physically demanding. As the tank bounces over craters and fills with smoke, he must grab a heavy steel shell, wrestle it into the breach, and clear the recoil path. Boggs was the fastest man in the division at loading a 75mm cannon. He converted the Sherman's primary weapon into a rapid-fire weapon. Bert Close was in the bow gunner's seat. He was referred to as schoolboy. He was only 17 years old. In order to enlist, he had lied about his age. He still had the gentle expression of a teenager who ought to have been more concerned with prom dates than Panzerfausts. He was the group's innocent member, but he became a surgeon after he acquired a .30 caliber machine gun. He was responsible for keeping German forces away from the tank and sweeping the infantry. He served as the lower hall's eyes and ears. And lastly, Willis Aller, the gunner, the person who drew the trigger. He was referred to as Groundhog. Aller was a tense individual. He was agitated. His under-eye circles were dark. He appeared to be a man about to have a breakdown in the back. However, the shaking stopped inside the tank when one looked through the telescopic scope. His eyes were like those of a hawk. At 800 yards, he could see the glimmer of a German helmet in a thicket. When the tank was moving, he could shoot a shell through a window at a distance of half a mile. The heavy hitter was him. A boxer, a baby, a jailbird, a schoolboy, and a groundhog made up the cast of In the Mood. On the side of their Sherman, they painted the name in large white letters. It was a declaration rather than merely a name. They were constantly ready to battle. In June 1944, immediately following D-Day, they arrived in France. The true nightmare was just getting started, but the beaches had been secured. The hedgerows are the Normandy bocage. It's difficult to comprehend how cramped the battle was if you haven't seen the hedgerows of Normandy. These weren't hedges for gardens. They were enormous old mud walls that stood 6 feet tall and were covered in dense, tangled trees and plants that had been growing for generations. They created thousands of tiny square fields around the area. It was a death checkerboard. It was a graveyard for a tank. A German tank could conceal itself behind an invisible hedge, wait for an American tank to climb over the mud wall and reveal its belly, and then launch a shell through the thin floor armor. There was a problem with the 3rd Armored Division. The Allied offensive was coming to a complete standstill. The German defenses were flawless. Every crossroad and opening in the hedges had been anticipated by them. The American crews were frightened. Paralyzed by the fear of invisible 88mm weapons, they were crawling along, inspecting every shrub. Lafayette Pool, however, did not crawl. His first significant battle happened close to Villers-Fossard. They had pinned down the infantry. In the muddy fields, the Gs were being devoured by German machine guns. There were reports of a panzer unit advancing to support the German position. It was obvious what the regular operating procedure was. Flank wide, wait for air support, or call for artillery. Avoid direct interaction. Poole tuned in to the radio reports. He snapped after glancing at the wretched pinned-down troops. "Follow me," he commanded his unit after keying his microphone. He didn't flank. He didn't hold off. He gave Baby Richards the command to drive directly into the hedgerow. With a bone-jarring crash, the mood crashed into the field after bursting through the undergrowth in a shower of roots and mud. The Germans were taken aback. They were accustomed to Americans being wary. They were accustomed to tanks that appeared out of nowhere. They had never witnessed a Sherman firing its main gun while racing across an open field. Exposed from the waist up, Poole stood in the commander's hatch. He would sign this. Poole rode with his head out as other commanders squinted through small periscopes while buttoning up within the turret. He desired to see everything. Screening down to Aller, he chewed on a cigar. "Gunner infantry, hedge line, 2 o'clock, identified." Aller responded with a shout. "Fire!" The 75mm weapon let out a roar. In the German machine gun nest, the shell detonated. "Hard left, driver." "Baby, don't stop moving." Mud sprayed from the rails as the tank slewed sideways. A German anti-tank shell missed the turret by inches as it flew by. Poole didn't duck, even though the air pressure from the passing shell was enough to make him gasp for air. "Loader, please give me one more," Poole shouted. Boggs shut the breech with a scream in return. They moved quickly. Schoolboy Close was using the bow machine gun to rake the tree line, killing German men as they attempted to flee. Aller was eliminating targets as quickly as Poole could identify them. They destroyed the German stronghold in less than 10 minutes. They eliminated the threat posed by troops and destroyed 3 armored vehicles. The remainder of the platoon rolled up once the dust had settled. Rising from the mud, the infantrymen gazed first at the blazing ruin of the German line and then at the lone Sherman tank with its engine idling in the center of the field. After exiting the turret, Pete cleaned his uniform of ash and examined the paint. There was not a single scratch in the mood. Although it was a minor triumph in a huge conflict, the divide was rocked by it. The rumors quickly began to circulate. In the 3rd Armored, there was a crazy Texan who didn't know how to reverse and battled his tank like a fighter plane. However, anyone who looked attentively could already see Lafayette Pool's fatal weakness. Yes, he was fearless, but he was also careless. He completely disregarded his own security. He said he couldn't smell the enemy via the periscope. Therefore, he refused to button up the hatch while under mortar bombardment. He relentlessly motivated his men. He didn't get much sleep. He was fixated on the rifle and spent his evenings cleaning it and inspecting the engine. "We're not here to survive the war," he said to his crew. "Our goal is to prevail. And eliminating them before they can eliminate us is the only way to prevail." It was an anti-infantry philosophy. It was effective against light automobiles. However, the exam was on the horizon. The actual test. The large cats from Germany were waiting. The 3rd Armored Division was released as Operation Cobra. The breakout from Normandy got underway. In the hedgerows, They were no longer vying for yards. They were racing all over France. And P was in the lead all the while. He was adamant about it. He persisted in pressuring his higher-ranking officers to allow in the mood to take the lead. It is a death sentence to be the point tank. The enemy sees you first. The tripwire is you. The point tank is typically the first to burn when a German ambush occurs. However, P asserted that he was able to anticipate the ambushes. The horrifying part was that he was correct. He had an eerie vision. He said he could see a German optic shining in the trees. The unusual pattern of camouflage branches was visible to him. The division encountered a blocking force in late July close to SDL, which included a combination of German Panzer IVs and self-propelled artillery. The column came to a halt. The lead tanks faltered. Past them, the pool raged. He shouted, "Get out of the way," over the radio. The mood rose to the forefront. It wasn't a skirmish this time. A duel took place. 400 yards away, a Panzer IV emerged from behind a farmhouse. It swung its muzzle in Pool's direction. It was sheer reaction that made the difference between life and death in that moment. "Brake, baby!" Pool let out a scream. Richards applied the brakes forcefully. The tracks locked up as the 30-ton tank skidded to a stop. The German shell missed the front armor by a split second as it flew directly in front of their nose. The tank was shaken by the shot's wind. "Front tank, target!" P yelled. The order wasn't necessary for Oehler. The Panzer had him in its sights. "Fire!" the Sherman responded with a rock. The round that pierced the armor flew true. A pillar of black smoke followed a burst of sparks as it struck the Panzer IV between the turret and the hull. In a moment, the German tank erupted. "Next objective," P shouted. He didn't even stop to see its burning. They advanced. A half-track, another German vehicle, attempted to escape. The schoolboy used a bow gun to hack it down. A German anti-tank gun attempted to pass. Jailbird was prepared with a he shell. Boom. The firearm was turned off. A typical platoon would need a month to demolish as much as Pool's crew did in a single afternoon. However, there was a price for this assertiveness. The tank was being beaten not by shells, but by the speed at which it was operating. The engine was getting too hot. The tracks were deteriorating. The crew was worn out. They were subsisting on smokes, adrenaline, and caffeine. "We were all crazy," Jailbird Boggs later remarked. "You had to be. You would leap out and flee back to Texas if you gave what we were doing any thought. We were sustained by War Daddy. He resembled a natural force. You didn't want to disappoint him." However, the machine itself proved brittle. This kind of mistreatment was not intended for the M4 Sherman. The Germans were also adjusting. They discovered that the issue was with one particular tank, the one within the mood painted on the side. They began focusing on it in particular. The enemy was starting to feel the psychological effects. German captives who had been captured were requesting to see the ace. The automatic tank was what they hoped to see. They thought the Americans had created a brand new weapon, a tank that could fire more quickly than anything they had ever seen. They were unaware that the tank wasn't brand new. Driven by a commander who wouldn't let him stop, Del Boggs was merely sweating and swearing while hurling shells into the breach with bleeding hands. General Maurice Rose, the division commander, was aware of the Lafayette Pool legend by August. Rose was a strict man who enforced rules. Typically, he detested cowboys like P. Rose was a pragmatist, though. He studied the map. The line advanced wherever P was. The Germans fell apart wherever P was. P was called to his command post by Rose. P towered over the general, filthy, unshaven, and smelling of sweat and cordite. He anticipated being court-martialed for carelessness. Rather, General Rose turned to face him and said, "Sergeant, how many vehicles have you destroyed this week?" P gave a shrug. "General, I quit counting. A handful. You cleared the whole area north of the river by yourself, according to the reports. Sir, I have my crew. Rose gave a nod. Pool, you're working hard. However, you're taking too many chances. You're going to murder yourself. P met the general's gaze. General? I've already passed away. Everybody is. How many of them I take with me before I run out of breath is the only question. Although it was a terrifying statement, it was accurate. P grasped the math. He was aware that the Sherman was a death trap. He was aware that In the Mood was living on borrowed time statistically. Every interaction was a gamble. He was going to keep rolling until Snake Eyes appeared. The resistance increased with the summer heat. In an attempt to break free from the Allied encirclement, the German army was withdrawing toward the Falaise Gap. They were in dire need. They were rats in a corner, and rats that are cornered retaliate fiercely. The division was advancing on the town of Fromentel. There was considerable armor in the vicinity, according to intelligence. Tigers. The U.S. Army's worst enemy was the Tiger tank. It was 60 tons in weight. Its 88mm gun was lethal. The thickness of its frontal armor was 100mm. Even at close range, a Sherman could not breach it from the front. You had to go behind a Tiger in order to kill it. However, you had to live long enough to flank it in order to get behind it. Poole was unconcerned. He guided the column in the direction of Fromentel. Poplars flanked the small road, making it a death zone. The radio crackled abruptly. Front, Tiger, Tiger. Ahead, a huge form emerged from the darkness. The whole road was blocked by it. The turret started to slowly turn in the direction of In the Mood. This was the real moment. When the math declared, you lose. P didn't go back. He didn't emit smoke. The German commander inside the Tiger never anticipated what he did. Charge him. P let out a cry. If necessary, ram him. The accelerator was pounded to the ground by Baby Richards. Struggling under the weight, the Sherman engine roared. The tank stumbled ahead, picking up pace. The German gunner anticipated either a retreating or a fixed target. A 30-ton steel brick hurtling toward him at 25 miles per hour caught him off guard. The turret traverse at the Tiger was excessively sluggish. The distance was narrowed in the Mood. 800 yards, 600 yards, 400 yards. The Tiger opened fire. The 88mm shell missed by inches as it screamed over the turret. The glass in Poole's periscopes was broken by the wind of its passage. P told Oler to hold your fire. Await the shot. Hold on. He was aware that the Tiger's front would deflect the 75mm shell. He wanted a weak point, either the tracks or the turret ring. 200 yards. Like a stronghold, the Tiger towered. Now follow him. Oler got fired. The Tiger's track was hit by the shell. The enormous connection broke. The Tiger stumbled to the right, revealing its thinner side armor as it spun on its shattered tread. Strike him in the side. Murder him. Oler fired once more, and once more. The Tiger's side was struck by 2 shells. The German monster's ammunition caught fire. The 60-ton tank's turret was completely blown off the hull by a devastating explosion. The heat scorched the paint on their side as In the Mood sped past the blazing debris. They had accomplished the unthinkable. They had defeated a Tiger tank in a game of chicken. Wiping perspiration and oil off his face, Poole sagged back in the hatch. His hands were trembling from the adrenaline rush rather than from fear. Are you all right, Daddy? From the driver's seat, Richards inquired. With a shaking hand, Poole struck a match and lighted a cigar. Baby, keep driving, he said. There are more of them to come. The beginning came to an end with this. They had made it through Normandy. They had made it through the breakout. However, the entire German army could see the target they had painted on their backs. The opposition would become more formidable as the Ace of Aces approached the center of the Reich. The calculations were catching up. There was a bend in the probability curve, and In the Mood's luck was about to run out. Not only was the math catching up by late August 1944, but it was also shouting a warning. Lafayette Pool, however, was unable to hear it. He was going too quickly. Not only was the Tiger tank destroyed, but it also served as a catalyst. It persuaded P that his insane notion, the accusation, the hostility, the refusal to hide, was the only path to survival. The German army was fleeing, and the 3rd Armored Division was speeding across France. And the point of the spear was in the mood. The tip is always there. However, the newsreels never depicted the realities of tank warfare. A tank is disposable. It's not intended to be the males inside. However, P and his group were destroying machines more quickly than the army could paint them. The original In the Mood did not make it through the summer. A lesser crew would have perished from the terrible blow. Coughing smoke and stinging their eyes, they scrambled out of the flaming hulk. The majority of men would want a break after escaping a flaming tank. They would request to be moved to the back. Pool went to the motor pool and insisted on getting another tank right now. And the soldiers gave him something different this time. They upgraded him to the M4A 176. It appeared to be just another Sherman to the untrained eye. However, it was a heavyweight glove for War Daddy. The barrel of the gun was longer. They finally had an opportunity to attack German armor after it launched a high-velocity 76mm shell. At fighting ranges, it could punch through a Panzer IV, but it wasn't a Tiger killer from the front. Now we can really hurt them, Poole said to Jailbird Boggs after glancing at the long barrel and patting the cold steel. A new degree of savagery accompanied the new tank. The darkest and bloodiest phase of the 81-day rampage began. This was no longer just fighting. It was eradication. The Germans started to see a problem. Reports of an American ghost tank began to reach the Wehrmacht High Command amid the turmoil of the retreat. Before the anti-tank guns could zero in, a single vehicle came on the flanks, smashed rear guard movements, and destroyed entire columns of supply trucks. They were unaware that it was Lafayette Pool. They were unaware that it was a Texas boxer. They simply knew that you were already dead in Sector 3 if you spotted a Sherman with white lettering on the side. In the Mood's psychological effects were turning into a weapon in and of themselves. Pool's hostility was infectious. When they saw him charging, the tanks behind him followed suit. When the infantry noticed that the Sherman was avoiding incoming fire, they moved forward. By pure willpower, he was advancing the entire division. However, the biological machine inside the tank was beginning to malfunction. You cannot fight for 81 days without facing repercussions. The human body isn't made to do that. Caffeine and instinct were driving baby Richards. He was so tired that he was having hallucinations. He later acknowledged that the road occasionally seemed to him as rivers or snakes, but he continued to drive since War Daddy had instructed him to do so. The naive youngster, schoolboy Close, had lost his adolescent appearance. A permanent film of soot and grease covered his face. His eyes were hollow and hard. He had witnessed too much. He had used a bow gun to kill far too many men. And Pool was falling apart. He was dying from the stress of being in charge and having to play Russian roulette with the German troops while ensuring the survival of his 4 boys. He seldom slept at all. A tense tic appeared in him. He didn't want to leave the turret, so he ground his teeth till they chipped. He was developing an obsession with his fatal weakness, which was his urge to be exposed and witness the combat firsthand. The periscopes, he said, were coffins. If I'm buttoned up, I'm blind, he declared. And we perish if I'm blind. As a result, every sniper in France was drawn to his 6-foot-tall silhouette that protruded from the top of the tank. He endured shrapnel, rain, and dust. He was challenging the Germans to strike him. This carelessness almost cost them everything during the Battle of Colombier. The worst time to fight was at dusk. You are tricked by shadows. In the Mood was advancing through a heavily forested terrain while flanking a settlement. Poole was standing in the hatch, as usual. The air suddenly broke. In a barn, a German dual-purpose flak gun went off. The shells were tracers, green light streaks that screamed past the turret. A shower of sparks hit Poole's face when one of them clipped the commander's hatch. "Go back! Go back!" Wiping blood from his forehead, P let out a scream. However, baby Richards did not go back. He froze. In that quiet, the tank halted. The crew of In the Mood faced their impending death as the German gun traversed for the fatal shot and the engine died. They were sitting ducks, making them a stationary target for a cannon fired at rapid speed. Poole remained calm. He did not fall into the turret. He reached for the Madus, a .50 caliber machine gun installed on the roof. With the tracers flying past his ears, he stood completely exposed and fired at the barn. A man armed with an anti-tank cannon and a machine gun engaged in combat. It was crazy. It defied the laws of physics. However, Poole's tracer fire streamed into the barn, igniting the hay and blinding the German gunners with flame and smoke. "Baby, start the damn tank." Never releasing the trigger, Poole yelled. The engine roared back to life after coughing and sputtering. Richards put it in full gear. Just as a German shell crashed into the location where they had stood a moment before, In the Mood stumbled backward into the forest cover. The crew cabin was filled with terror and the smell of burnt ozone as they sat in the dark woods with the engine idling. Oler, the groundhog, was trembling. Jailbird Boggs was in prayer. Poole plummeted into the turret. He had shrapnel wounds on his face that were bleeding. He glanced at his scared staff. He lit a cigar. He said, "We know where they are now. Go back outside. Left flank. Murder them." And they did. They left again. They stood on either side of the barn. Oler fired a 76 millimeters bullet through the doors. They silenced a flak gun. The War Daddy impact was this. He could take terrified men and make them do something. He made them fear failing him instead of dying. The numbers were skyrocketing by mid-September. Single digits were no longer used to record the score. 258 enemy vehicles had been destroyed in the Mood. Consider that figure. 258. That is not the score of a tank platoon. That is the score for a battalion. They had taken 250 detainees. 3 separate tanks had been shot out from under them, yet they had survived. However, the law of averages is a harsh ruler. 10 times in a row, you can flip a coin and get heads. It is available to you 20 times. But tails will ultimately arrive. The Siegfried Line, also known as the Dragon's Teeth, was reached by the 3rd Armored Division. This was not like the others. It had been a war of mobility in France. It would be an attrition war with Germany. The landscape shifted. The hills became steeper. The roadways became more constrained. The German opposition became more formidable. They were defending their country. A peculiar atmosphere descended upon the crew early on September 19th, 1944. They were worn out, exhausted to the bone. They were close to Stolberg. The day was cloudy and gray, the kind of day when the roar of engines reverberates for miles. The pool was abnormally quiet. "I'm on my last tank," he said to another soldier that morning. It wasn't a grievance. It was a premonition. "I have a bad feeling, General," he said to General Rose. "The bell is ringing." Rose volunteered to switch him around. "You've done enough, Poole. Return home. Sell your war bonds. Educate new crews. You are a hero." P gave a head shake. "I can't abandon my boys. They perish if I go. I take them in and I take them out." For the last time, he ascended back into In the Mood. The goal was to block the German retreat by flanking Stolberg. The Germans, however, were waiting. They had built up a trap especially for the belligerent American columns. The deadliest predator in their arsenal, a Panther tank, had been placed in an ideal ambush position. Its long 75 millimeters barrel covered the town's single intersection and it was concealed behind a concrete wall. And the mood was going right for the killbox. The crucial weakness that had often saved them, speed, assertiveness, and leading from the front, was going to be their downfall as they rolled toward Stolberg. Speed was vital on France's vast fields. However, speed was blindness in the cramped urban confines of a German town. Pool was inside the hatch. He was looking at the rooftops and windows, but he was unable to see past the bend. Baby Richards was speeding. His goal was to cross the intersection. Groundhog was searching for targets by moving left and right across the turret. With his hand on the safety rail, Jailbird Boggs had an armor-piercing shell in the breech. They were functioning at maximum efficiency and were a flawless machine. The ace of aces was them. They were unbeatable. After that, they rounded the corner. The world ended at 5 o'clock in the evening. Poole initially noticed the panther's muzzle. A dark hole appeared to be staring directly at him. Point blank, it was less than 100 yards away. There was no time for strategies, boxing moves, or cunning. "Back up!" P let out a scream that tore at his throat. "Back up, baby!" The tracks locked as Richards pressed on the brakes. Sparks flew as the Sherman skidded on the cobblestones. The German gunner, however, had been anticipating this. He knew exactly where the crossroads was. He was not required to aim. All he needed to do was fire the trigger. The Panther opened fire. It was the loudest sound they had ever heard. It didn't happen with a bang. The crack resembled the breaking of the sky. The tank was not immediately struck by the high-velocity shell. It crashed into the ground adjacent to the tracks. The 30-ton Sherman was raised into the air like a kid's toy by the explosion. It was flung sideways in the mood. It landed on its side after colliding with a ditch. The tracks whirled aimlessly in the air while the engine shrieked. There was a blender inside. The crew was hurled up into the walls made of steel. Jailbird was rendered unconscious. The schoolboy's nose was bleeding. P was hurled from the commander's hatch midway. His ears were ringing, and his lungs were full with smoke as he was in a trance. He made an attempt to flee. The German tank wasn't finished when he attempted to reach his men. The Sherman was crippled, but not dead, according to the Panther commander. He gave the command to fire again. The second shell hit its target. The turret was struck. It had a disastrous effect. In that moment, the legendary War Daddy, the man who destroyed 258 vehicles and was unkillable, faced the one factor that he was unable to outwit: physics. The pieces of shell cut through the air at the speed of sound. They discovered the commander's only exposed area. Lafayette Pool cast a downward glance. The dust began to settle. He could hear the terrible ringing in his ears. He attempted to get up to see how his boys were doing, but he was unable. The conflict was ended, he knew with a chilling, horrifying clarity as he glanced at his leg. The count had begun, and the boxer was down. The shard of shell had amputated the limb, not just shattered a bone. The man who had stood erect in the tower for 81 days, Lafayette Pool, gazed down at his leg's devastating wreckage. The blood pulsed into the German ditch's dirt, a vivid crimson scarlet. War Daddy was not giving commands for the first time during the conflict. He said nothing. He was stunned. However, the German gunner didn't comprehend the crew if he believed he had killed the tank. The link that had been created in that steel box was beyond his comprehension. The loader with the criminal record, Jailbird Boggs, did not flee. Ignoring the sniper fire crackling around him, he crawled out of the upturned Sherman. He pulled Poole from the hatch. The child, schoolboy close, reached for the medical pack. They were no longer using a manual. Their father was being saved by their boys. He was pulled into a foxhole by them. The crew of In the Mood held their position around their fallen leader, while the German Panther continued to prowl the crossroads in an attempt to do the job. They used a tourniquet. They used morphine to stab him. Poole glanced at his crew, his guys, and uttered his last order of the battle in a whisper as the color faded from his face. He didn't request his mom. He made no request for a clergyman. He snatched Beatty Richards' collar and growled, "Someone please look after my tank." He was concerned about the machine, even while he was dying. Minutes thereafter, reinforcements showed up. Pool was placed onto a jeep by the medics. He strained his neck to look back as they drove him away. He observed the mood was abandoned in a ditch in Stolberg, resting on its side with smoke curling from the turret. It was the end of the 81-day rampage. The deck had lost the ace. After examining the leg, the field hospital's medical staff decided to amputate it far above the knee. The war in Europe was still going on when P awoke from anesthesia, but his war was ended. He was returned to the United States. A 25-year-old man with one leg, a chest full of medals, and an apparently empty future. The majority of history books end here. They claim that the hero received a prosthetic, returned home, and led a happy life. That's not true. That's just the cleaned-up version. The truth, the unwritten chapter in Lafayette Pool's life, was a silent, bloody conflict that was more difficult than anything he encountered at Normandy. P was a strong man. His body was the foundation of his identity. He won the Golden Gloves. He was a fighter. He was now incapacitated. In June 1946, he was released from the service. "Thank you for your service, but we don't need one-leg tank commanders," they remarked, shaking hands and giving him a pension. P returned to his native Texas. However, the quiet of calm was overwhelming. He made an effort to lead a typical life. He started a gas station. He made an effort to live like a civilian. But he was followed by the war's demons. He didn't hear the sound. He didn't see the point. Above all, he missed the crew. In that Stolberg ditch, he felt as though he had left them behind. His military career was over, according to the math. Amputees are not permitted to serve in combat roles, according to the unambiguous restrictions. However, Lafayette Pool had ignored the math his whole life. He had disregarded the Panthers' 5-to-1 odds. He had disregarded the Sherman's survival statistics. He has now made the decision to disregard the Army's medical board. To get back in, he started a campaign. He was a letter writer. He harassed generals. He made use of his notoriety as the ace of aces. His brain wasn't in his leg, he claimed. He maintained that a tank commander is not required to flee. He must reflect. He must take the lead. He must engage in combat. The Army finally gave up in 1948. Lafayette Pool was permitted to re-enlist in a rare exemption. After World War II, he was among the few amputees to return to active duty. However, they did not assign him a desk job. They sent him back to the armored school at Fort Knox, which was as near to combat as they could find. They turned him into a teacher. In 1950, picture yourself as a young recruit. You're learning how to operate a tank. Additionally, your instructor is a huge Texan with a severe limp, a chest full of silver stars, and a reputation that terrifies the cops. The lessons he learned in blood were passed on to the following generation of tankers. He explained to them that the handbook is not a Bible, but rather a guide. Speed is armor, he taught them. He showed them that using violence may save lives. He would use a cane to tap his prosthetic leg and utter, "When you pause, this is what occurs. Don't think twice." Up until 1960, he remained in the Army. As a chief warrant officer, he eventually retired. He saw advancements in tank technology. He witnessed the Pershing take the place of the Sherman, followed by the Patton. He observed the armor becoming thicker and the guns growing larger. However, he consistently insisted that the machine is irrelevant. It's the staff. Who lives and who dies is determined by the 5 men within. How did he accomplish it then? It appears unattainable when we consider the 81 days, 258 vehicles, 12 tanks, and 1,000 kills. It goes against the Sherman tank's physics. For decades, Military experts and historians have attempted to reverse engineer his success. And when you take away the tail, you discover four crucial elements, the four secrets that made it possible for an army to be destroyed by a tin can. The biological machine is the first factor. The majority of tank crews consisted of a group of people working together. Pool's team was a cohesive unit. They continued to be together. Promotions that would have divided them were rejected. Their rhythms were familiar to one another. When to reverse didn't need to be explained to Baby Richards. He sensed the change in the conflict. Jailbird Boggs didn't require instruction on when to change ammunition. He was ready for the objective. They had an advantage that no technological specification could quantify thanks to this split-second synchronization. They responded more quickly than the Germans anticipated. The fatal defect as a strategy is the second factor. The German OODA loop observe, orient, decide, act was actually broken by Pool's carelessness, his persistence on charging, and his failure to use cover. The German leaders were prepared to battle a wary foe. They were perplexed when they observed a Sherman charging across an open field at 30 miles per hour while firing erratically. Their tactical model was not compatible with it. They paused. They questioned whether it was a trap. P murdered them by closing the distance during that hesitant time. He employed his own madness as a psychological tool. The third factor is the groundhog's eyes. The significance of Willis Oller, the gunner, cannot be overstated. Whoever shoots first wins in tank warfare. You must first see in order to shoot. Oller's capacity to identify targets was supernatural. More significantly, though, P had faith in him. When Oller said, "Tank left," P didn't inquire as to where. "Traverse left." "Fire," he commanded. The time lag between spotting and killing was eliminated by that trust. Acceptance of death is the fourth factor. The darkest factor is this. The majority of soldiers are merely attempting to live. To save their lives, they take defensive action. Lafayette Pool had come to terms with his impending death. He said to General Rose, "I've already passed away. You are free when you eliminate your fear of dying. You are able to take chances that no rational individual would. Since you don't intend to drive it home, you can push the tank to its mechanical breaking point." He was the most dangerous man on the battlefield because of his fatalism. On May 30th, 1991, Lafayette Pool passed away while sleeping. His age was 71. He died close to the base where he instructed so many young tankers near Ken, Texas. They discussed more than simply the medals during his funeral. They discussed the man who resisted being beaten, the boxer who withstood the most powerful blow the war could deliver. He lost his war, his tank, and his leg, yet he climbed back up to answer the call for the next round. The original In the Mood is no longer available at the Patton Museum of Cavalry and Armor at Fort Knox. It was abandoned in that German ditch. However, you will discover the heritage. The training materials were revised as a result of what he demonstrated was feasible. The Sherman tank was a defective device. It was too thin, too tall, and too combustible. However, Lafayette P. and his team demonstrated that it wasn't the steel that counted for 81 days during the summer of 1944. It was the soul within the steel. They demonstrated that if you had the guts to light the match, a Ronson liar could destroy the Reich. According to the calculations, they ought to have passed away in the first week. A Sherman cannot kill a tiger, according to the math. An amputee cannot be a tank commander, according to the math. Math is merely a suggestion, as demonstrated by Lafayette Pool. There is more to the War Daddy story than merely tank destruction. It has to do with not accepting the odds. It involves considering a suicide mission and determining that should you choose to end your life, you will do so with vigor. This gets us to the last issue, which may define your life as much as his. Do you back down when the odds are stacked against you and the math indicates that you cannot win? Behind the hedgerow, do you hide? Or do you instruct the driver to charge directly into the fire and floor it? CTA segment. Please hit the like button if this story about Lafayette Pool and the In the Mood crew touched you. It really helps us tackle that tricky YouTube algorithm, which can feel just as tough as the Siegfried line, right? I'd love to hear from you, so dive into the comments section. Where are you tuning in from? Are you in Germany, the US, the UK, or somewhere totally different? We're building a global community of history buffs here. I read every single comment, so let me know you're part of the battalion. Drop your flag and share your city. Oh, and if you had to choose a role in the Mood, would you go for commander or driver? Tell me below. If you hadn't already, subscribe. Every week, we are uncovering the historical narratives that the textbooks have forgotten, but that we still recall.